The evening of our first date was a revelation to me. I had always thought Tracy was pretty, but when she came out in her new sundress and makeup, I realized how beautiful she really was. Soon we became a couple, and then we started sleeping together. Then we started talking about getting married. Amanda, who was now married to Chad, was finally just a bad memory. And then one day Tracy and Kimberly disappeared, and it was my fault. It all started because of a goddamn set of dishes, my family's Chinese dishes to be exact. The dishes were inherited from my parents to me. My mom said she never used it, but I probably would have, of course. I never used them either. They were just sitting in the garage of my former home, but then Amanda asked that if I wasn't going to use them, could she have them? I agreed because the 3 boxes of dishes were heavy. However, when I told Tracy about it, she got angry and accused me of doing whatever Amanda wanted. This made me angry and the argument escalated. I found out that Tracy and Kimberly had packed up and left the next morning. I was devastated to the extreme and tried to call her to no avail. And then I wanted to cry when I thought about Tracy and Kimberly. But at the moment I had to pull myself together. As I said, I had a plan that I hoped would turn the economic tide in our neighborhood if it worked. The bank promised to refinance the land loan and give me a short-term loan until the summer, but everything depended on the outcome of my presentation. Today. Afterward, I'd find Tracy and try to make things right. God, I hoped I wasn't too late. We'd been looking for new businesses to relocate to Milton or the surrounding area for almost 6 months. I found 6 that had announced their plans to expand their business or relocate. No sooner had we put together proposals for them than I read an article in the Wall Street Journal about Jeff Sterling and Sterling Pharmaceuticals. Mr. Sterling had just announced that he was moving a significant portion of production from China to the U.S. They began their search with 3 states: California, Oregon, and North Carolina. California was quickly weeded out due to Super G taxes and crazy government regulations. Oregon fell out of contention after the Portland riots. The government's complete inability to protect businesses was not a place Sterling wanted to go. That left only North Carolina. After reviewing dozens of initial presentations from across the state, the final 3 locations remained. One of them was the Milton area. Our committee of 6 did most of the work in preparing the presentation. After researching the other 2 locations, I decided we had a good chance. We had a 400-acre industrial park that was virtually empty to accommodate a new manufacturing plant. The site was close to a highway and a railroad line ran to the site boundary. However, everything hinged on our presentation in Asheville that evening. I, as the on-air host, was chosen to do the presentation. Our entire presentation was recorded on 6 flash drives so that each committee member could have their own copy. I memorized everything that needed to be said and only needed the flash drive for the pictures and graphs we wanted to show. If we were able to convince Sterling Pharmaceuticals to choose our location, it would immediately mean 100 of construction jobs. When the plant is up and running, it will employ 250 full-time employees. In addition, Abbott Medical Supply Company has announced that it is moving production of critical medical supplies from China to the United States. I have already spoken with the person in charge of finding a place to locate production in the United States. So far, they have been very favorable to our region. Moreover, they said that if Sterling chooses us, there is a high probability that they will follow suit. It was about a 90-minute drive to Asheville. Still, I had plenty of time because our presentation wasn't scheduled until 7 in the evening, and it was now only 2:15 p.m. Besides, I wanted to finish filling out the quarterly income tax withholding forms. Suddenly, I realized that there was no music coming from the speaker in my office. Silence on the radio for a few seconds is disturbing. If the silence lasts for more than 10 seconds, it causes panic. I hurriedly got up from my chair and headed for the main studio. However, the computer and automation system were still working. The music was coming through on the transmitter. I rushed down the hallway to the transmitting room, unlocked the door, and discovered that the main transmitter had shut down. At that moment, Jimmy appeared beside me. "Do you want me to switch to the backup transmitter?" he asked. "Please, I'll disconnect the main one and see if I can figure out what's wrong. We keep both transmitters on at all times, but only one of them is transmitting our signal to the tower." Jimmy flicked the switch and I was relieved. When I heard the music playing in the speakers again, that meant we were back on the air. However, I wasn't entirely comfortable using the backup unit. It was an old Sparta tube transmitter, and lately it had begun to show a tendency to overheat. "Do you want me to try to contact?" Scott asked Jimmy. "That's a great idea. Jimmy, while you're at it, I'll keep digging into the main thing." Maybe it's something simple. While Jimmy ran to call our engineer, I continued to test the various components of our main transmitter. 10 minutes later, Jimmy showed up again. I couldn't get Scott on the phone because he left for another job. I talked to his wife and she said she would have him call us. That didn't make me happy, but there was nothing I could do about it, so I continued fiddling with our main transmitter. About 15 minutes later, Jimmy walked into the transmitter with a cordless phone. "This is Scott." Scott explained that he was working in 3 cities and couldn't leave. He had to finish his work before the weekend, but if the situation at WJWJWJW got serious, Scott would be here the next day. In the meantime, he advised me to open a window in the transmitting room. This will greatly reduce the temperature in the room and prevent the Sparta transmitter from overheating and to back me up. Scott suggested I remove the back cover from the transmitter. "Tom, a snowstorm is about to start, so you'll have to close the window," Scott said. "When you close it, turn the temperature down to 55 degrees. It'll be uncomfortable for you guys, but it'll keep the station running." "I don't have to worry about Tracy and Kimberly," I said, and my heart squeezed. "They won't be home today, but I'll tell Jimmy to close the window when he leaves and turn down the temperature." Hanging up the phone, I looked at the clock. It was 4:50 p.m. I had to put my foot up because it was a 90-minute drive to Asheville and I didn't want to be late. "Jimmy," I said, poking my head into the main studio, "I'm out of here before you leave tonight. I need you to close the window in the transmitting room, then get the temperature down to about 55 degrees. "Will do, boss," he said with a smile. I was about to leave when I suddenly remembered something else. "Hey, if you don't mind, could you stop by Henry's across the street before you go home? He was trying to shovel the driveway this morning, and he was wheezing really bad." "He didn't look too good." "I'd love to do that," Jimmy said, waving me toward the door. "But you need to get on the road because the storm is going to start in an hour." Snow started falling as soon as I drove out of town, but it was only a light dusting. I was more concerned about the wind, which was gusting 25 to 30 miles per hour. In one of these gusts, my car skidded a little to the right, but I easily straightened it out. Still, it made me a little nervous. 15 minutes later, it started to snow harder and visibility got worse. This made me slow down and I began to seriously fear I was going to be late. Then I thought about the mountain road. It wasn't really a road going over a real mountain. It was a 2-lane road with an elevation gain of about 2,500 feet. Nevertheless, the road could be dangerous in the winter. However, the mountain road would shorten my trip by about 40 miles. Before I could make a decision, my cell phone rang using Bluetooth. I answered the call. "Tom, where you greeted me in this slightly panicked voice of Stan Willard, the city's mayor and chamber president." "I'm on my way." "Stan," I replied, "it's only 10 past 5, and our presentation isn't until 7 this evening." I know Stan was clearly worried. "It's just that I forgot my flash drive and Anne's not coming because her husband fell and broke his arm and I haven't been able to get in touch with anyone else. So it's up to you. No pressure, right, Stan?" I grinned. "Hey, I'll be there, so relax." Okay, Stan's voice didn't relax. "However, it's just that I heard that if we don't flunk the presentation, Sterling's going to pick our spot, and we really need this deal." "I understand, but relax. I'm only an hour or an hour and 15 minutes away." When I disconnected the phone call, the decision had been made for me. I was driving down a mountain road. I figured that at my current speed it couldn't get any worse. Plus, I figured the wind must be lessening due to the trees. As I reached the turnoff, I was relieved to see that the chain was still on in the county. A sheriff's deputy can put a chain across the road if he deems it too dangerous. I turned left and started up the slope. As I made my way up the slope, I was glad I had snow tires on. Despite the buildup of snow and ice, my car held the road pretty well, and as I expected, the wind abated a bit. Once I was among the trees, I was starting to get excited about my decision to take the mountain road. When an animal whizzed by in front of me, I turned the steering wheel to the left to avoid it, and I succeeded. But in doing so, the car went into a skid, and I was unable to control it. Then the car hit a low fence and flipped over. It flipped 3 times, and I know it bounced off at least 1 tree before I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I found the car upside down and its roof partially crumpled. The pain was radiating down my right leg, and when I tried to move, I couldn't free my right leg. The driver's side window had been smashed out, and as I felt the wind blowing around the car, I realized that the others were gone too slowly and carefully. I examined my body. I could feel both arms and my left leg. I could wiggle my right leg, but it hurt like hell to do so. I was dizzy and nauseous to the point of almost throwing up. Digging in my pocket. I pulled out my cell phone. I quickly dialed 911 and hear nothing. Looking at the phone, I realized I had no connection. I then noticed that my battery was almost dead, because of all my preparations and problems with the transmitter. I had forgotten to recharge my phone. It was completely useless. This struck me like a thunder strike. There was no way I was going to make it to the presentation on time. As I sobbed, I realized that I had lost my last chance to save my radio station. Then the realization of my true situation hit me. I would most likely freeze to death stuck in my car where no one would think to look for me. I lay in my crumpled car, lapsing in and out of consciousness. I had no idea how long I lay there because the battery in my phone was dead. When I regained consciousness, my thoughts shifted from the current situation to the presentation I was supposed to be doing, and now it wasn't going to happen. I was overcome with ennui at the thought of missing any chance of getting the Sterling people to consider our location. For me, the consequences were far worse than simply losing the opportunity to attract a new employer to the area. I could see my whole life crumbling before my eyes. I was about to lose everything and worse. I was letting the entire community down. I passed out again, and when I woke up the snow was falling at breakneck speed and the wind was howling. I was so cold and my chest hurt. I coughed and saw blood on the snow. It didn't take a rocket scientist to realize I was in bad shape, but all I could think about was the mess I had made of my life. I felt so tired and defeated. I wanted to give up, close my eyes, and just forget about life. Then I heard something. I called out for help, but no one answered. I called again, and that's when I started coughing. I saw more blood on the snow. Then I heard someone coming down the slope. When I looked up, it was Henry heading toward me. "Tom, thank God, I found you," Henry said, rushing forward. "What are you doing here?" Sounded my question. "I came looking for you," said Henry, crouching down and then sitting up. "I thought you'd be foolish enough to take the mountain road." "Did you call for help?" I asked and coughed again. Now I felt a pain in my chest. Henry shook his head. "Sadly, I don't have cell phone reception. I tried when my car got stuck in the snow. I walked the last half mile before I found the spot where your car went off the road. I was really scared that you were dead. I wasn't so lucky." I coughed again and more blood appeared in the snow. "But it doesn't matter. I blew it. I should have stuck to the main road. I would have been late, but I still would have been able to make the presentation. Now Milton and the whole neighborhood will suffer because I screwed up. Don't be so hard on yourself," Henry said sternly. "You didn't screw up anything. In fact, if it weren't for you, no one in our neighborhood would probably have ever heard of Sterling. I'm so tired, Henry. I'm tired of being such a loser. I'm tired in body and soul. I just want to close my eyes and let myself go." "Stop it." Tom Henry looked almost angry. "You're not a loser." I tried to laugh, but all I got was a harsh cough. I looked over but couldn't tell if I'd spit out any more blood because the tiny light from the electronics in the car was starting to dim. "I'm such a loser. Henry, my wife, left me. She practically told me I was useless. Now I'm going to lose the radio station, and I'll probably have to file for bankruptcy. Even Tracy finally realized what a loser I was and left. It would be so much better if I never came to Milton. At least Amanda wouldn't have run into Chad and I might still be married. Coming to Milton was a huge mistake. You can't believe it," Tom Henry said, shaking his head. "Yes, I do believe it," I said, coughing. "My life and everyone else's would have been a lot better if I hadn't come to town. But it doesn't seem to matter because I don't think I'm going to get out of here alive. I'm so cold and in so much pain." "Well, I'm not taking any of that shit," Tom Henry said with strength in his voice, and a tear ran down his cheek. "If you hadn't come to Milton, I never would have met you, and I think you are one of the best things that has happened to our town." I was totally surprised at such an emotional outpouring from Henry. I considered him a very good friend and was worried about him because of his health. But I never knew his feelings were so deep. Nevertheless, it didn't change my mind. "You've always been very kind to me, Henry, but even my own father doesn't think too highly of me. He abandoned my mom when I was 8, except the fact that I'm a failure and I'm too tired to care." "You're very wrong," Tom Henry said firmly, "and I'm going to convince you of that before this night is over. But right now we have to keep you alive. Don't worry, I'm just not worth it." Bullshit. Sweeping away the snow around the window where I lay trapped. Henry cleared an area 2 or 3 feet in diameter, exposing the ground. There he found brown leaves, twigs, and sticks. Because of the cold, none of these items were wet. Henry reached into the car and picked up a few loose pieces of paper, probably old gasoline receipts. Crumbling up the leaves and paper, he laid them on the freshly mowed ground. Branches were then laid on top of it, and small and large sticks were placed on top. Nat Henry covered everything with his body and pulled a lighter out of his pocket, lighting the leaves and paper on fire. Henry placed the lighter next to me and began tossing additional small twigs into the flames. I smiled as I looked at his lighter. His wife had given it to him when he was discharged from the Marines. It had the Corps emblem on the front and his years of service engraved below. Henry treasured this lighter and carried it with him everywhere he went. Once the branches began to flare up, Henry moved smaller sticks toward the fire. Henry brushed off more snow and got more sticks, which he stacked next to the fire. The fire wasn't very big, but it gave off a warmth that I felt wash over my face. Gradually, the penetrating cold gradually eased, but just as I began to warm up, my body began to throb with pain. Neither Henry nor I said anything at first, as I watched the dancing flames and pondered how my life was falling apart. I don't know if I fell asleep or passed out, but I remember a dream, or more like a nightmare, that I had. It started with me standing in front of the house Amanda and I were renting in Greenville, and a young man I didn't know was standing next to me. "Sad, this is where I used to live," I said to the young man. "Yes." "I know," he replied, looking at me. I looked around and saw a brand new Mercedes in the driveway. I didn't recognize the license plate number, but the expiration date indicated the current year. The front door opened and I saw an unfamiliar man step out of it. Amanda then appeared and took one step toward the exit. Quickly looking around, she was wearing a see-through nightgown that hid nothing. Amanda kissed the man on the lips. "Are you sure I can't stay?" The man asked. "No, Tom will be home in an hour and I need to get cleaned up." Amanda giggled. "I guess I don't need to tidy up because he's pretty clueless, but I don't want to risk him catching us. He's in line for a big promotion, and when he gets it, I'll give him a divorce." I was shocked and started yelling at my wife. "You bitch, get your whore out of my house." However, neither of them even looked in my direction. Obviously, they couldn't hear me. "They can't hear you." The young man confirmed. "Remember when you said that if you'd never come to Milton, at least you'd still be married to Amanda?" "Well, you were right. You are still married to her. Is this the happy marriage you thought it would become in?" I started walking up the driveway to see if I could do some bodily harm to this asshole who was entertaining my wife. I've never hit a woman in my life, but I seriously considered making an exception for Amanda. But no sooner had I taken the third step than the scene changed. When the image cleared, I was standing in the snow outside a dilapidated trailer with the young man still beside me. A police cruiser and an ambulance with flashers were parked at the entrance. I looked around and recognized the trailer park, but the last time I drove by it, it didn't seem as desolate as it did now. Another police car pulled up and an officer got out of it. "What do you have here, Fred?" The newly arrived officer asked his comrade an overdose. "It's that guy Sanders. The paramedics think he got a hot dose of this new shit heroin. That's been on the streets recently. No big deal. The guy was a total loser anyway." Yeah, he was a pain in the ass. The guy never finished school and never had a steady job. He was constantly getting busted for one thing or another. He'd just gotten out of jail for trying to rob a store on 303 Road Street. What a total bastard he was, who uses a gun in a robbery, and the asshole didn't have the sense to drain it. When the clerk saw the gun leaking, he swung the baseball bat at Jimmy. "No," I shouted, "that can't be Jimmy. He graduated from high school." Jimmy didn't want to go to the graduation ceremony because he didn't want anyone to see his alcoholic mother. But I talked him into going, and I arranged with Tracy to get his mother sober and dressed. Then I talked about a dozen people into going to the ceremony with me. When Jimmy's name was announced, we all jumped up and started waving way to go. Jimmy signs and blowing our party horns. This elicited a roar from everyone in attendance, and I saw tears in Jimmy's eyes. I think it was the first time he felt that anyone cared about him. "That didn't happen because you didn't come to," Milton said the young man. "Sadly, must be a night for losers." I heard the second officer say, "I just heard on the radio that Lou Talbot was found dead in an alley on 3rd Street. He was clutching a half-full bottle of scotch in his hands. The way he was drinking was only a matter of time," Fred said, shaking his head. "Nice guy, but a real drinker." "No, that's wrong too. I sobbed Lou quit drinking. No, he didn't. The young man said he had no reason to quit drinking. I felt tears roll down my cheeks as I thought of Lou and looked at Jimmy's emaciated body. As they began to zip up the bag, I fell to my knees, closed my eyes and started to cry. But then the scene changed again, and when I opened my eyes, I found myself kneeling on the main street of the town. In the middle of the day, there seemed to be unusually few people in town. Suddenly I noticed that more than half the stores were empty. Milton wasn't a ghost town, but it was far from being one. I struggled to get to my feet. What happened? Okay, the economy was bad, but not that bad. Don't you understand? The young man asked. You never moved here. Nobody ever knew anything about Sterling Pharmaceuticals. They put their factory in another part of North Carolina. Sterling wasn't the only company you had your eye on. You dug up information on others, but since you weren't involved in the search, nothing happened. The town has hit rock bottom, and it's going to be a long time before things get better, if at all. I stared at the young man in shock. Then the scene changed again when my eyes focused. I was standing in the parking lot of an abandoned Walmart store. There was snow on the ground, the wind whipping back and forth. Then I saw a car parked in the shadows of the abandoned building. I thought it was strange that there was one car parked behind the building. I wondered if someone had abandoned it, so I headed over there to check it out. When I got closer, the car looked familiar, and then I was blown away. It was Tracy's car. I raced to the car praying it was empty. But as I got closer, I saw a figure in the back seat. No, 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 I screamed. When I got to the car, I looked out the window and saw Tracy and Kimberly huddled together and wrapped in a thin blanket. Wake up. Tracy, Tracy, baby. Come on. Wake up, honey. Please wake up. Please wake up. Please wake up, shouted I through the window. But even just looking through the glass, I could see that they were dead. This can't be happening. I wailed. Tracy has a key to the station. She wouldn't keep Kimberly out in this cold. Tracy would have taken her there, no matter how mad she was at me. There is no station because you never came to Milton. The young man said quietly with tears in his eyes as he looked at mother and daughter. I was overwhelmed with a heartache that made me collapse. I cried pitifully as I lay in the snowy parking lot. When I opened my eyes, I saw a small fire and Henry looking at me. How are you feeling? He asked with deep concern. Not very well. I replied weakly. I'm going to go see if I can get some help. He said as he stood up, you need to stay awake. If you fall asleep, you won't wake up again. I watched Henry walk up the embankment until he was out of sight, but my thoughts were racing. The dream was so real that tears had flowed down my cheeks and were now freezing. I don't know how long I lay like that, but I was in a lot of pain and it was hard to breathe. But even worse was the fact that I was so tired. I wanted to just close my eyes for a few minutes, but Henry told me to stay awake and I tried my best to do that. But I was losing the battle and I could feel my eyelids starting to close. I just had time to close my eyes before I heard voices calling my name. I tried to yell back, but I didn't have the strength. Nevertheless, the voices grew louder and louder, and then there was an EMT kneeling in front of me. Mr. Ambrose, can you hear me? He shouted to me. I nodded. Okay, I need you to stay with me, he said, fumbling for my pulse. Then he turned to someone else. Tell them to hurry up. He's in bad shape and we need to get him out of here right now. The EMT rubbed my face and arms while the others gathered wood for a small fire that was barely burning. Soon the fire was quite large and more heat was coming from it. But I was so tired, I was in so much pain and the warmth didn't reach my feet. Besides, all I wanted to do was sleep. I heard a loud whirring and I thought I heard the metal of my car groan and rattle. It sounded to me like they were using the jaws of life to free me. Sometimes the noise came from so close to me that it scared me a little. Finally, I was pulled out of the car and put on a stretcher. As I rode in the ambulance, I barely regained consciousness, but I suddenly felt very ashamed of myself. I had never been a quitter, but as I lay in my wrecked car, I was ready to give up. Anger swept through my body, directed solely at myself. I had sworn that I would never quit again, and now I was ready for the fight ahead. With my mind, I knew I would probably lose everything, but they would have to drag me kicking and screaming from the station. I promised myself that I would keep the station on the air until the sheriff came or until the power company cut the power. Then, things got very foggy. The last thing I heard was get him ready for surgery. Stat. I woke up some time later. It was still dark and I didn't realize where I was, but I felt someone holding my hand. I tried to see who it was, but everything disappeared. When I woke up again, the sun was shining, but there was no one around. I don't know how long I drifted in and out of consciousness, but once I woke up, Dr. Anderson was standing next to my bed studying my chart. He was my attending physician. "Welcome back, Tom," Dr. Anderson said with a smile. "Things have been going your way for a while. You have 4 broken ribs and one of them punctured along. You have 3 broken bones in your right leg, but what they were most concerned about was hypothermia. If they hadn't found you in time, you would have frozen to death. It was very wise of you to build a fire. That may have been what saved your life. I didn't build the fire. I corrected the doctor. Henry did, Henry Wilson." Dr. Anderson looked at me strangely. "Yes, he found me first and started the fire." "That can't be right," the doctor said, looking a little uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to have to tell you, but Henry died of a massive heart attack early yesterday morning. I believe one of your employees, Jimmy Sanders, found him on the floor of his kitchen. He called 911, but when he was taken to the emergency room, Henry was already dead." "That can't be, doctor," I insisted, certain that Dr. Anderson was wrong. "Henry found me in the car and set the fire. I saw him and talked to him. I'm sure what you saw was a hallucination," the doctor said calmly. "Remember, you had just survived a terrible car accident, thought you were badly hurt, and were slowly freezing. Your mind switched to someone you trusted, someone you thought could save you. It's a natural reaction to the situation you found yourself in." I ran that through my head and had to agree that the doctor's explanation made a lot more sense than the dead man setting a fire for me. A few hours after waking up in the ICU, I was moved to a regular room. My mind began to clear and depression came over me, but to my surprise, I didn't feel depressed about the station. Sure, I was worried about it, but every time I thought of Henry, tears came to my eyes and my heart ached at the thought of losing Tracy and Kimberly. Henry was the first person I really got to know on our street, and over the years, even though he was over 30 years older than me, we became close friends. Henry was born in Milton, and the only time he lived anywhere else was when he enlisted in the Marines. He spent 3 years in the service, 2 of which he fought in Vietnam. He told me some stories about being in combat, and they got me right down to my bones. Yet he came out of that horror as kind and caring a man as he was. Henry claimed that Ellie's love kept him going and made him happy. Henry married his wife Ellie shortly before beginning his second tour of duty in Vietnam. They had been married for 46 years when Ellie had a heart attack and died. With her gone, Henry's world came crashing down, but thanks to a wide circle of friends, Henry was able to rebuild some semblance of a new life, and I always felt privileged to be a part of that new life. Eventually, I had to put thoughts of Henry aside and force myself to think about the nearly impossible struggle to save the station. When I finally called, I was relieved that Jimmy answered. At least someone was there for me. He assured me that everything was taken care of. Scott even fixed the main transmitter and thinks he knows why the Sparta is overheating. He has already ordered parts for that transmitter. I wanted to talk to Jimmy in more detail, but I had to cut the conversation short because Stan had just walked into my room. "Thank God we found you," Tom Stan said in a trembling voice. "More than half the town was looking for you. You scared us all to death, Stan." "I'm very sorry about that, and I'm even more sorry. I missed my meeting with Sterling. I apologized. I shouldn't have taken the mountain road. I just didn't want to be late." "Tom, you don't need to apologize for anything," Stan said, patting me on the shoulder. "As for Sterling, I don't know what to make of him. When you didn't show up, I went to the meeting and started talking about the presentation as best I could remember. Then I got a call that you were missing. I explained what was going on and that the city was mobilizing to look for you, and Lef said in an, 'I'm sure we'll get a thank you letter in due course, but not thank you,' I said, sinking further into depression. "I don't know, Tom." Stan shrugged. "Mr. Sterling called me this morning to see how you were doing. He also said he wanted to meet with you. According to him, any man the whole town is looking for is someone he wants to meet." I didn't know how to feel about Jeff Sterling's desire to meet with me, but I realized that we had to assume that the new plant that had sprung up in our neighborhood was dead. "Stan, I have documents in my office from 6 other companies looking to expand or relocate. I think you should take them and have the committee start working on new proposals. I'll take the documents, Tom, but I don't want you to worry about anything except getting better. I hear they plan to kick you out of here tomorrow. I can't promise. I won't worry, but yeah, they're going to discharge me tomorrow. I said, pulling the covers off my right leg to reveal the cast. Of course, I'll be walking around on crutches for a few weeks. If you need anything, feel free to ask, Stan said before leaving. About 10 minutes later, there was another person standing in the doorway at the sight of her. My heart throbbed. Is it okay if I come in? Asked Tracy with a very unsure smile. Yes, of course, I replied, holding out my hands. I'm so happy to see you. I'm really sorry. I'm the reason you left. I'm not going to give Amanda the dishes. Tracy was instantly in my arms and covered my mouth with her hand. When I mentioned the dishes again, it was never about the damn dishes and you didn't make me leave. I was just really jealous that you still had feelings for Amanda and you used the dishes to get back together with her. No, I don't care about Amanda, I assured Tracy. It's true what they say. Time heals a broken heart. I loved her very much and her betrayal hurt me deeply. But as time went on, I realized that I was never her true love. I'm not sure she ever truly loved me at all. But the truth is Amanda never got over Chad, but you can't just stop loving someone, can you? Tracy said timidly. That's why I was so jealous. I was afraid you were still in love with her. After all, she's so beautiful, and I'm so plain. Stop it, I said immediately. Yes, Amanda is a beautiful woman, but so are you. And you don't have to worry about her ever. I don't love her, and I don't hate her. What's more, I don't feel anything for her anymore. Besides, I found someone much better. I kissed her and she responded with a passionate kiss. Tracy pressed herself against me for a long time. When she finally pulled away, Tracy whispered in my ear, I love you so much. As Tracy sat down in the chair next to the bed, I saw a little head peeking out from around the corner of the doorway. Mommy, do you have a few minutes yet? Yes, honey, you can come in. Tracy said to her daughter. Is Mr. Tom still mad at us? She asked her mother, fearfully. Mr. Tom has never been angry with any of you, I immediately replied. In fact, Mr. Tom loves you both. Kimberly squealed with happiness and rushed toward me at full speed. If Tracy hadn't intercepted her, I'm sure she would have thrown herself on top of me. The next day, Jimmy drove me back to the station, and Tracy had already cleared a path so I could get around on my crutches. Over the next few weeks, I got better physically, but the station and my financial life was dying. I was behind on all my bills and saw no way to turn things around. I had already received notice that the mortgage on the land for the new tower would be sold on the courthouse steps. 5 days after Christmas, I received a second notice on my electric bill and realized I was days away from having my power cut off. When that happened, I was really screwed. My staff agreed to get half pay until I could get by, but I was struggling to pay even that, and Tracy adamantly refused to take any of it. In fact, she was saving money wherever she could. Tracy found ways to extend the life of our printer cartridges, and she made notebooks out of used paper. Instead of buying bottled water, Tracy took used plastic bottles, cleaned them and filled them with tap water, then put them in the refrigerator. She started buying all of our food at the dollar store and a winter coat for Kimberly at the thrift store, and Tracy did all of this while going from business to business trying to find new advertisers. I had tears come to my eyes when Kimberly walked into my office one morning and held out her piggy bank to me so I could pay my bills. I kissed her and told her she was very sweet, but I thought she should buy something nice for her mother. I felt like I was drowning and there was no life preserver around. I was losing faith in everything but Tracy and Kimberly, but that's what hurt the most because I knew I wouldn't be able to provide for them anytime soon. They deserved so much more than I could give them. The day before Christmas, I was in a terrible state of mind, but on that day I was visited by 3 angels who restored my faith and lifted my spirit. No, they were not spiritual entities. They were flesh and blood, just like you and me. Nevertheless, they were my savior angels and they came in my darkest hour. The first of my angels entered my office a little after 9 in the morning. He was a tall, distinguished-looking man with short brown hair and a ready smile. I hoped it was a potential advertiser, not a salesman, however. He was neither. Good morning, Mr. Ambrose, he said, extending his hand. I'm Joffrey Sterling. I stood up and taking his hand, balanced it on my leg. It is an honor to meet you. Sir, no, it's an honor for me. I may only be a few minutes late, but I wanted to meet the man who made an entire town go in search of him. That's a bit of an exaggeration. I protested, reddening my face. He waved me away. I don't think it's an exaggeration at all. I must say, I was stunned when the mayor of your city interrupted his presentation to go looking for you. The presentation, I must say, was pretty crappy, nevertheless. I was intrigued that this city had banded together to find one of its own that impressed the hell out of me. Then you sent me a flash drive with the actual presentation, and I was even more impressed. I just wanted you to be the first to know that Sterling Pharmaceutical has decided to build their new plant. Here, we signed the papers yesterday. The county has promised to expedite the permits, and if all goes well, we should start construction within a month. Congratulations. You've done your town. Proud, Mr. Sterling, on behalf of all my neighbors. Thank you. I managed to mumble, and then another thought hit me. Is it really official? Is it okay if I announce it on the air? It is Jeff, and you can shout it to the world. All the papers are signed, sealed, and delivered. It's all settled. Now, I've authorized the plans to be drawn, and the surveyors will be out within the week. Now I have to go, but it has been an honor to meet you, and I look forward to working with you in the years to come. With those words, Jeff turned and walked away. I went to the production room and prepared an announcement of the news. I then put it into the rotation of commercials that were to be played every hour for the rest of the day. My phone started blowing up within minutes of the announcement going live. I spent the next 2 hours talking mostly to committee members, assuring them that the news was true. It was indeed great news for our neighborhood, but I felt it came too late for me. The bank couldn't approve the loan for the station until January at the earliest. By then I would be on the brink of ruin. A little after 11 a.m., my second angel showed up in the person of John Zornbeck, a local attorney. I knew because we were both members of the same Rotary Club. I tried several times to talk him into advertising on the station, but he only laughed and said he had enough to do. I thought that perhaps with the economic downturn. John had changed his mind, but that wasn't the purpose of his visit. "Tom, did you know I'm Henry Wilson's attorney?" he asked. No, I shook my head. Henry and I rarely talked about finances. He told me he lived on a Marine's pension, Social Security, and a few investments. We both knew we each had to watch our pennies. I've been Henry's attorney for the last 20 years, John explained. Now that Henry has passed away, I am the trustee of his estate. Years before Henry's wife died, they set up a trust, but you're right, he didn't have much. He lived mostly on his Marine Corps pension and Social Security. He also had about $45,000 in investments, and he owned the house outright. At this point my phone rang again, and apologizing. I answered it. It was Stan. Apparently he was the last to know about Sterling's announcement. "Listen. Stan, can I call you back? I'm with someone right now." Stan agreed as soon as I promised to call him back when I was free, sorry. But after the announcement that Sterling is going to build their plant here, I'm a little crazy. I said with a sheepish grin. "Yeah, by the way, congratulations. You guys on the chamber committee have done a fantastic job. I can see you're very busy, so I'll get right to the point. Henry left you everything he had. I liquidated his investments yesterday, and here's a cashier's check for $45,000 hand-on and 7/3/153. The house and everything in it belongs to you. You can either live in it or sell it. Whatever you want to do, here are the keys. If you want to sell it, I will arrange the sale. It's one of the nicest houses on the block, so I think it will sell for between $225,000 and $250,000. I immediately told John to put the house on the market. After John left, I called Standby and told him what Jeff Sterling had told me. He was so agitated he could barely speak. I finally told him that I had some errands to run and we would talk later. I sat looking at the cashier's check and thought about how generous and loving Henry had been to me. This gift meant a lot to me, and then I remembered the dream I'd had as I lay locked in the car. I was sure it was Henry's influence over the years of friendship that had brought me back from the brink of rejection. Hanging up the phone, I shouted to Tracy. She came running in, figuring I had some sort of health problem. Kimberly followed her mother with a look of concern on her face. "Look at this," I said, holding out the cash register receipt. "Where did this come from?" "John Zornbeck is Henry's attorney, and he just told me that Henry left everything to me. John cashed all of Henry's investments and had the bank cut this check for me. We need to go to the bank to deposit it, but before we do that, let's get the checks ready for the most important bills that need to be paid. While we're at the bank, I want to draw up the paperwork for a short-term line of credit." Running errands that day turned out to be one of my most enjoyable days in a long time. With Tracy's help, we determined which bills needed to be paid. Electric and gas bills were first on the list, followed by payroll that took about $4,500 then. With the help of Sly Albert at the bank, we figured out how much it would take to pay off the rest of the land debt. I ended up with just under $1,400, of course. That amount did not include the $25,000 line of credit I had requested. Sly told me that wouldn't be a problem, given the inheritance I was receiving. After finishing up my household chores, I invited my two favorite girls over for dinner. Tracy objected at first, saying it wasn't worth spending the money, but I won the argument by pointing out that we had already paid our most pressing bills, paid off the land, arranged a short-term loan, and could count on about $200,000. When we sold Henry's house, so the least I could do was take my two favorite girls out to dinner. And Kimberly squealed when I told her we were going to IHOR. It was her favorite restaurant, and I loved eating scrambled eggs and bacon for lunch or dinner. When we got back from lunch, Tracy and I decided to check out Henry's house. I had been to it many times, but never once had I looked in the closet's file, cabinet, or basement. The house had just about everything you'd expect from a bachelor. His clothes were clean but wrinkled. There was groceries in the refrigerator, but mostly frozen dinners. One closet was full of Christmas decorations. Henry put them out every year, but because of his declining health, he hadn't done so for the past 2 years. One of the bedrooms was locked, but I had a key, so I unlocked it. I was very surprised to find that Henry had a gun collection. He had about 30 guns. I realized that some of them were quite valuable. He had 5 antique guns ranging from a flintlock to an antique derringer. I ended up selling the antiques for almost $10,000. The rest of the guns, with the exception of the Glock 40mm, which I kept, I sold for $12,000 while inspecting Henry's house. My third angel appeared. It was Billy Richards. He was the emergency room doctor who first found me in my wrecked car. "Tom, I was told you were here," he said with a smile. "I just wanted to see how you were doing and to get some things back to you. I can already see that you're getting along great, and that always makes us EMTs very happy. We found these things in your car, and I wanted to return them." Billy handed me my 9mm Glow, which I kept locked in the glove compartment. I took it with a sheepish grin. Then he held out a lighter with a Marine Corps Encore emblem on it. "That's not mine," I informed him. "Really?" said Billy with a look of confusion on his face. "I found it in your car right by the driver's side window." "That's impossible." I said immediately it was Henry's lighter, and he never got in that car, so I can imagine how his lighter could have gotten in there. "Sir, I don't know what to tell you, Tom," Billy said with a shrug, "but I found this lighter in your wrecked car." "Ian, I examined the lighter and saw the inscription of his years of service under the Marine Corps emblem. It was definitely Henry's lighter, but I wasn't going to argue with Billy, so I just accepted it before leaving the house. Tracy grabbed Henry's photo albums. We decided to look through them tonight. When we watched TV, I discovered that Tracy had never seen the movie. It's a Wonderful Life with James Stewart and Donna Reed. I checked the TV guide and discovered that it would be shown at 6 p.m. that night. After putting dinner on trays, I lit the fire in the fireplace with Henry's lighter, and we started watching the movie. I must confess that it is one of my favorite Christmas movies of all time, but it wasn't until about 20 minutes into the movie that I realized there were huge similarities between the movie and what I was experiencing. The big difference was that I didn't have an actual angel helping me. My experience was just a nightmare that shook me and made me remember my true values. When the movie was over, Kimberly was sound asleep. I took her in my arms and put her in her bed. I wondered with a chuckle if visions of sugar plums were dancing in her head. Then I climbed back into bed with Tracy, who was going through Henry's photo albums. "Look at this picture," Tom, Tracy said, holding it out. "It's a picture of a young Henry with his wife Ellie. She was so beautiful I looked at the picture and my heart raced. I grabbed Henry's lighter from the nightstand and looked at the picture again. The young Henry in the picture was the same man who had been with me in the dream. At that moment I realized that I had been wrong. There was indeed a real angel watching over me that night. It was Henry. Christmas that year was truly special. Not only did I spend it with two people I truly loved, but my financial problems, thanks to Henry's generosity, were greatly reduced. I was still struggling because the economy had not yet recovered, however. The atmosphere in the town had changed radically. There was now optimism and faith in the future. 6 months after that Christmas, Tracy and I were married, and 7 months after that, Henry Ambrose was born. But our life wasn't all rainbows and unicorns. When baby Henry was born, his lungs were not fully developed. The doctors assured us that he would eventually outgrow the problem. But for 2.5 years, little Henry struggled to stay on his feet. He tired easily and choked when he played with Kimberly or other children. By then, COVID-19 was raging across the country and Tracy and I feared for our son. Then, the thing we feared most happened. Henry contracted the COVID virus. It started with a slight cough, and then a low-grade fever on the third day. We had to rush him to the hospital by then. The doctors knew that respirators were of little use. Fortunately, the doctor treating Henry did his own research. After several days of conventional treatment, with Henry getting worse by the day, our doctor started using non-polity-correct medications, but Henry's condition continued to worsen, and we were told to prepare for the worst. Only one of us was allowed to be near Henry at a time, so Tracy and I alternated sitting by his bedside. As devastated as I was, I knew Tracy was barely hanging on, but more than anything, I was worried about Kimberly. When Henry was born, she became like a second mom to him. She fed him, played with him, and changed his diapers, even if they weren't dirty. While Tracy and I spent time at the hospital, Kimberly mostly stayed in her room and cried many times. When I went to check on her, she would be sitting on the floor clutching Henry's teddy bear in her hands, tears streaming down her face. On the morning of the 8th day, I woke up in Henry's room, and the sun was just beginning to shine. When I looked at my son, he was watching me. When he realized I was awake, he smiled at me. "How are you feeling, son?" I asked, barely managing to suppress the question. "Daddy, I'm hungry," he replied weakly. "Can I have some pancakes?" I don't think I've ever been happier than I was at that moment. "I'll see what I can do, son," I said, pressing the nurse call button. The nurse told Henry that the pancakes might taste too good at first, but she agreed to bring him apple juice and toast with jam. Henry didn't complain and ate everything from then on. He got better every day. After 3 more days in the hospital, we were finally able to take him home. As excited as we were to have Henry home, I think Kimberly was happier than all 3 of us for weeks. She barely let Henry out of her sight. Eventually he complained to me and I had to put some restrictions on Kimberly's mothering. That was 16 years ago, and all that time Tracy and I had been happily married. We had our ups and downs. In college, Kimberly tore her ankle playing soccer, which ended her college career. She worried about it for a while but then recovered. Over the years, I've had to have my appendix removed and hernia surgery. Tracy was frightened when she discovered a lump on one of her breasts. It turned out to be just a SIT. Henry's lungs finally developed as the doctors promised, and he started playing soccer and baseball in high school. He was pretty good, but he didn't play sports. In college, Kimberly went off to Wingate University to study nursing. When it was Henry's time, he decided to attend the small nearby Tyler University. His major was communications. Kimberly earned her degree and became a physician assistant. She works at a small medical practice in Milton. Henry, on the other hand, decided to follow me into the radio business. He loves radio as much as I do, and had studied the business from the inside out besides. He was a pretty good salesman. Tracy and I wanted to have another child, but that proved impossible because Tracy had to have a hysterectomy due to women's health issues. When the question of children was closed, Tracy and I turned our energies and love to our 2 children and, of course, our radio business. Yes, Tracy still worked at the radio station. As for Amanda and Chad, they married, and I have to admit that seeing them out on the town holding hands and hugging was difficult at first. But their union ended after 5 years when Chad was recalled to the main office because he failed the company's southern expansion. Amanda refused to move to Philadelphia, and after a bitter divorce, they parted ways. There were rumors that one or both were cheating on each other. I bet on both but never found out the truth. Funny thing is, I see Amanda regularly now. After she and Chad divorced, Amanda moved back into the house across the field and continued to run her business. One day there was a knock on my office door, and I was surprised to see Amanda standing there. She had been divorced for about 3 months at that point, and I had no way of knowing what she wanted. "Can I interrupt you for a minute?" Tom asked Amanda. She still looked about the same, but I wasn't particularly happy to see her. I hoped she hadn't come over to get into some kind of argument. "Sure," I replied, pointing to one of the chairs in front of my desk. "What can I do for you?" "I'd like to start advertising my business on the radio again. And don't tell me you don't have any spots available. I'm listening, and I know you can fit me in. I also know that Maggie's interior design is no longer advertising." I laughed. "Okay, Amanda, how much do you want to spend?" With the financial part settled, I took Amanda to the production studio to cut the commercials. She of course wanted to voice her own commercials, which made sense. After finishing the job, I felt awkward sitting there with my ex-wife. Finally, she broke the silence with a sigh. I know this is very late, and probably means nothing to you, but I'm really very sorry for what I did to you. I have no excuse except that Chad really got into my head. I sat stunned for a while, but finally smiled and nodded no, that means a lot. Thank you, Amanda continued. The longer I was with Chad, the more I realized that I had made a huge mistake. I realized that everything you said about him was true, but by then, I had already burned all the bridges that could have led me to you, but if we could be like distant friends, I would be very happy about it. I agreed, and Amanda remains one of our advertisers to this day. We don't socialize except at social events, and oddly enough, Tracy and Amanda get along better than Amanda and I do, and since Amanda is an advertiser at the station, I meet up with her whenever she wants a change of scenery. Her business is going strong, but her personal life is not so good. She's been engaged twice, but both times the relationship fell apart, and I have no idea why, nor am I interested. I sold Henry's house and made about $211,000. I spent most of that money on erecting a new tower on 10 acres of land. After the tower came up in Milton, I built a new building for the station. Unfortunately, it has no living quarters. I also built a small studio on the site of the new tower. Everything was designed so that we could broadcast from anywhere. There is an internet line between the old studios and the new transmitter site. Once we started broadcasting from the new tower, things took off. Lou still works at the station, and he hasn't had a drink in years. He even has a steady girlfriend. I don't know if they'll ever get married, but they seem to be very happy together. Jimmy got a job at a major station in Charlotte and hosts a daytime program. I looked at the Arbitron ratings, and Jimmy is second in his time slot. Also, Jimmy is engaged to a girl from Milton. They are planning to get married in August. Tracy and I have already sent word back that we will definitely attend. Jimmy would come to Milton from time to time when he was on vacation. Sometimes he'd hook up with Lou or our new DJ Todd Richards, but now that he's signed with his station, he can't do that anymore. Still, Jimmy slips on the air from time to time, changes his name, and puts on a fake voice. Everyone in Milton knows it's him. You're probably wondering what became of Chad, like I said. He was always an arrogant and vindictive jerk, but he wasn't as smart as he thought he was. After Amanda and I got married, he really kept tabs on both of us. His parents originally wanted him to settle in Charlotte, but he convinced them that Greenville would be better, but apparently it was all part of his plan to pay me back. He really is a sick puppy. He was so busy chasing Amanda that he wasn't paying attention to business, and when I started taking some of his advertisers, it made him so angry that he made a terrible mistake. He convinced his family to buy an FM station in Greenville. He paid $650,000 for it, which I believe was about $200,000 more than it was worth, needless to say. He couldn't make it profitable because he didn't know what he was doing, and by the time Chad's parents realized this, they decided to take a loss and sell the station. However, by the time they put the station up for sale, it was in dire financial straits. I decided to buy it and negotiated a price of $395,000. However, the main reason for the purchase was that I learned that I could move the FM antenna to a new location for AM broadcasting and increase the power. Until we do that, the FM station will be run by Henry, and he has already gotten it to break. Even at least half of the newspapers that Chad organized were closed because they weren't making a profit. The one in Milton, however, is still in business, but it's no longer owned by TriStar. Two brothers bought it, and the first thing they did was meet with me. We both agreed to offer an advertising package combining the newspaper and the radio station. They seem to be doing well, and they just bought another newspaper 2 towns away. We'll make the same deal for that one again. I've heard rumors that Chad has been exiled to a newspaper in Maine, but I don't know or care if that's true. What I do know for sure, however, is that Chad will not be running TriStar. His father recently announced his retirement, and Chad's brother Michael will be taking his place. It's Christmas time again, and the kids are home from school, and yes, I built a fireplace in the new house, and we continue to watch It's a Wonderful Life every Christmas Eve in front of the fire, which I light with Henry's old lighter. I thank God for allowing Henry to watch over my family and me. But before I end this article, I want to share one last story with you. Shortly after my son Henry woke up from his COVID disease, he told me about a dream he had. My son told me that he dreamed he was walking down a road toward a bright light, but he was stopped by a soldier. The soldier told him that he was going the wrong way, and taking my son by the hand, led him to the other side of the road. That's when he woke up. Dad, My son said to me with a perplexed look on his face. The soldier said he would see us all again someday. I've only told this story a few times and naturally no one believes it except my family. I don't care if they believe it or not. Ever since my accident, I believe Henry was my guardian angel and I thank God that I was honored to be his friend. Merry Christmas. And as Tiny Tim said, God bless us all, the end. If you haven't watched the first part of this video, the link will be in the description. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.